Welcome to the People Fuss podcast, everybody. My name is Doug Daniels.
And I'm Carrie Prince.
And we are here to discuss
the fuss
about people.
Unpacking the headlines and stories around human connection and disconnection in life, love, and leadership.
That's right. And today we are bringing you a very special episode of People Fuss, an interview that we did with Zolal Habibi around what's going on in Iran and how people, and particularly Gen Zers, are coming together to resist and fight for popular democracy.
That's right. Zolal is a fierce advocate on behalf of the voiceless inside Iran. She is an Iranian-American based in Europe, and she serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. That's the NCRI, as we'll refer to it. She's been doing this for over 2 decades now, and her activism began in her teens, profoundly shaped by the loss of her father, who was a respected Iranian writer and political dissident. He was killed by the regime during the 1988 massacre, and that set her on a path to advocate globally for a free, secular, and democratic Iran.
Our conversation was heartfelt, it was eye-opening, and filled with a lot of surprising information about what we think we know about Iran and what's going on there and what is actually happening in Iran. I really loved this conversation, and I think everybody should give this one a listen.
Yep. Here's our interview with Zolal Habibi.
All right, Zolal, thank you so much for joining us. For those of our listeners who don't really know what's going on right now in Iran, can you give us kind of a bird's eye view of what's happening on the ground right now?
Yes, definitely. First, I'd like to say hello to everyone who's tuning in and watching. And also, I wanted to thank you for this opportunity to be able to come and echo the voice of the Iranian people, especially during these very critical times. It has been over 210 hours that people have not had any kind of internet connection and very, very limited phone connection. So they really depend on us being able to echo their message. To give an overview, as you said, of what is going on in Iran, well, 20 days ago, protests broke out in Iran with strike of the bazaar. The bazaar is the heart of Iran's economy. It's in comparison, it's like the Wall Street of Iran in a way. The strikes began due to the economic crisis right now in Iran and the plunging of Iran's currency value. And but what was important was from within the first few hours, the theme and the issue on the table was, the overthrow of the entire regime, and the student movement. Students across different universities joined in with the merchants, with the bazaar, to be able to extend this protest and also the strike.
That's so powerful. I love that.
So what was really important, I think, is that bridge of connecting the different generations, people from different walks of life, from different segments of Iran's society coming together in a joint message, and with a joint goal and cause. And so that's what we saw, and that's why it spread pretty rapidly. The reality is that people on the ground in Iran, they know that taking part in protests is not something to take lightly. Unfortunately, they know that they will be met with suppressive forces and bullets and live ammunition, but despite that, they come to the streets, and that is very powerful, I think. And we see the determination of a generation, that especially the Gen Z of Iran right now, and the rebellious youth who are saying, we're not going to succumb to this regime and we won't change. As of Thursday, I would like to say, there has been an internet shutdown and communication shutdown. Right now, like for instance, we've had some calls coming in from Iran. They're very limited. It's like 2-3 minutes. It is being listened to, so it's being monitored. So if you say anything, it'll get disconnected. If you're giving information on what is happening on the ground. So it's very limited. People are just trying to give news out to their families that we're okay, we're good. The other thing is that people can't call one another in a lot of cities right now. Like you can't call each other's, cell phone or SMS.
That's unimaginable. I can't imagine.
Yeah, They're saying that in some places, as of yesterday, you can send a few SMS messages, but that is very limited. So even within Iran, what they've done is you can't contact people in another city or another province, so that way be able to control the flood of information that is being spread. So if people know, like for instance, the protests are still continuing in this area, it'll give them the aspiration to continue in their city too. So they want to cut off that information. The reality is the regime has used very brutal force, something that I think is unprecedented since the 1980s, this amount of force against protests. So
yeah, we've been seeing and hearing news that is pretty horrifying in terms of body bags and what people are actually experiencing. Can you verify that it's that bad?
unfortunately, it is. The numbers, it's not concrete, but it is thousands and thousands. It is at least 3,000 people who have been killed. You're seeing the images from the morgues. And the regime is doing this. I mean, some of it they're even broadcasting themselves because they want to spread fear in society. And you can just imagine what it is that these families are going through, looking for their loved ones. There have been over 50,000 people who have been detained, according to the National Council of Resistance of Iran and their network out of Iran, what they've been able to verify in the last few days. The Iranian regime itself has also attested to that they have arrested tens of thousands of people. We've seen them do this before, so there's a background to this. Back in, like, for instance, the 1980s, especially 1981, 1982, when they had a massacre in Kurdistan, and then it was the political activists that they came after in 1981. This is something they would do. They would print pictures of children who had been executed the night before, and they would just write, would the parents of these children come and identify their bodies, because we don't even have their names. And that spread fear in society because everyone knew that every day there are children being executed, some in 13, 14, 15-year-old. I don't know how much a 13-year-old knows about politics to be executed based on that. But that the Khomeini wanted to send a message that I see no mercy when it comes to keeping my power. They had pregnant women executed. They had elderly mothers in their 70s and 80s executed.
Zolal, what is the difference then between what's happening now and then what happened in 2009 during the Green Revolution, or Green Movement, as it was known?
Well, there are actually a few major factors. First of all, that protest, the spark behind the protest. Back then, the spark was from within the regime. So it was a factional internal fighting. So, for people in Iran, it's clear that we've never had true elections. It's a selection, as people say in Iran. Sure. You have to choose between which candidate that Khamenei wants. And at the end of the day, whoever Khamenei wants is brought out of the ballot box. So it's just, a show for the West to say that we have some kind of a democratic system in place.
Well, that's depressing. That's horrible and depressing.
It is.
Yeah, it's always funny how these dictatorial regimes always have to have this facade of democracy. Like, even they have to pay lip service to some democratic notion, even though it's complete bullshit.
Yeah, and we'll get into this, but that's the exact opposite of what you work towards, Zolal, and so we'll get into that too.
So at that time, it was the issue was like Ahmadinejad was brought out of the ballot box, and for everyone it was clear that even based on with all the lying and everything that the regime does, this is it's not logical. But it wasn't like Mousavi was all that much better. Mousavi was the prime minister during the 1988 massacre in the 1980s, when there was the most executions. But Ahmadinejad is called the man of 1,000 bullets because he personally executed 1,000 people himself.
Yikes.
And that's how Khomeini decides who is fit to rule, because they have shown their,
psychotic tendencies. How about that?
Their loyalty.
Loyalty,
that they're willing to do whatever to keep this regime in power. That's why, like, for instance, Raisi was brought in, even though he had a 6th grade education, but he was one of the people who was on the death committees in the 1988 massacre. So if you look at every president of the regime, they have that kind of a background.
And you know what? That's actually happening with ICE right now. I was just listening to, like, they're so proud that they have no education, but they have guns and loyalty. I mean, that it's a very common thing we're finding.
Yeah.
So at the time, the issue was an internal issue, like within the regime. So there was an extent of how much it would go because, you know, it was deriving on that internal finding. So the first few days, where's my vote, whatnot, and then, you know, the regime was able to suppress that very easily. They couldn't use force on it, and that's why the protests were very large. And because there were factions of the regime itself who were in the demonstrations, who were in this rally because of power fighting internally. But so it's very difficult to go from where is my vote to complete regime change, right? Unfortunately, at that time, the Iranian regime in July, like 1 month into the protests, realized that it was on the brink of falling apart. So they attacked the organized resistance movement, which was in Iraq at that time. And with that, they knew attention would be diverted from the protests, and also those who were actually concentrating on extending these protests were now had to deal with, you know, this crisis that they were facing. So that bought the regime some time. And then in December 28th, actually, it was a religious holiday in Iran. It's the death of Imam Hussein, which is like the third Imam of Shia Islam. And so that ceremony turned to clashes with the regime. And afterwards, one of the heads of the regime said, if we had not been able to control the capital 6 more hours, we would have fallen. They did use a lot of their foreign proxies for the suppression. They brought in a lot of people from the Hezbollah and Hashd al-Shaabi and whatnot to suppress the protesters, because when it continued like 6 months, the regime was not able to use its own suppressive forces. A lot of them were like, you know what, we can't continue to kill our own people like this. So there was a lot of people who defected at that time and left the regime, but unfortunately these two issues really helped. And unfortunately also the international community helped the regime at that point in 2009. One of the slogans on the streets was, at that time it was President Obama had just come into office practically. One of the slogans was, Obama, Obama, are you with us or are you with them? But unfortunately, both Europe and the US, they extended a hand to Khamenei and they said, we don't want you to be overthrown. Just, you know, let's talk and don't do this or whatnot. What we're also seeing today too, like for instance, there's a lot of words of condemnation, but, you know, thousands and thousands of people were killed in 2-3 days and there's no concrete action.
What would you like to see happen from either the United States or European countries?
I think it is a very delicate subject because we also have a history in Iran of a foreign intervention that we don't want repeated.
Yes, it's how the regime got to power in the first place, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, exactly. So the reality is that we're not asking for troops on the ground or anything like that. But what is important is having a strong stance. Like for instance, first and foremost, the international community, they knew that the Iranian regime is going to shut off the internet and communications, but they can provide, you know, that technology for the people of Iran to be able to connect, and that ties the regime's hands automatically.
Yeah, it's Starlink that they shut down, right? Is that the internet provider in Iran?
They came and bought it from outside of Iran and brought it back into Iran to have communication, and people were connecting that way.
Yeah.
But that has been shut down, and right now the regime is collecting like any satellite dish that they see in any shape or form. Right now they're actually, one of the things they're doing, that randomly they go into cafes, anywhere, randomly they check everyone's phone. If there's any videos on it, any images on it, they delete it.
Oh my
because
God.
they're trying to make sure that before internet is connected, they can remove all of these things so people don't have that,
Wow.
those,
Absolutely
documents.
insane.
Talk about overreach and
I
at the
know.
same time futility. I
I
mean, how are you
know.
going to delete all the videos off of everybody's phone? That's insanity.
So one is the communications that they can connect. The
Yeah.
second is, especially for like Europe and the UK, blacklist the IRGC. Because
And the IRGC is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, correct?
yes, which is the suppressive forces. The third
Stooges.
is to recognize the right of the Iranian people to resist in face of this tyranny, and to fight back. And the fourth is the UN Security Council needs to take Iran's dossier to international court. Khamenei needs to be held accountable for crimes against humanity and war crimes, because what they're doing right now is war crimes. They're going into hospitals, they're shooting people who are wounded from the protest in the hospital and killing them.
I saw a report that they're also using ambulances to shepherd the IRGC around, disguising their movements, which is a violation of the Geneva Conventions to hide troops behind medical camouflage, for lack of a better word.
There are a lot of people right now who are wounded, but they haven't been taken to the hospital. They've been kept in homes, but it's at least they're keeping them alive.
They don't trust it. Yeah, I would do that.
Yeah.
I'd be like, let's take a gamble on that leg cut, darling.
Yeah. Jesus. Yeah.
Terrifying.
First of all, it's very important to know when you see all these facts, it's very easy to just lose hope. But the people in Iran haven't lost hope. Right now, in a lot of the calls, they're like, no, we're continuing. It hasn't stopped. And that's like one of the main messages that they try to keep on giving, that don't think it's finished and it's over. The people of Iran know that no one's going to hand us freedom in a silver platter, and we're going to have to pay a price for it. Already, there has been a grave price paid, with over 120,000 people who have been executed by this regime for their political beliefs. Just in 2025, 2,200 people were executed in Iran.
And that's not talking about protests or anything. That's just political executions.
Yeah, and right now there are actually thousands of people who are on death row in the prisons in Iran, and that's why we have the Tuesdays Against Execution strikes that have been going on for almost 3 weeks now. The reality is that is the situation that people in Iran are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And we know that in the final days, the regime is going to be more brutal. I don't think the people of Iran are not that naive. They know it's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight, the overthrow of the regime. But they know that in the final phase, the price is going to be very high. Mm-hmm. But what is important is the fact that we're seeing people that are willing to pay this price. One of the things that I think is really important is the role of the rebellious youth and resistance units on the ground.
Yes, tell us about the rebellious youth. I want to hear it. Come on, Zolal.
We love rebellious youth.
Tell us more about it.
Yeah, well, so, like, for instance, for about a decade now, the Iranian resistance realized that we need to have organized on the ground inside of every city in every town in Iran. So what they did was they started forming these networks of people. It started with small groups of like 2-3 people in each city, in each different town, with people that you know you can trust. And then they started forming these units that we call resistance units. And they started their activities. Their activities started with maybe like graffiti on the wall, a poster, whatever, but it keeps the hope alive. This is what we need to concentrate on. And that has grown. Like every year we're seeing it practically double. For the most part, a lot of these people who are in the resistance units, a lot of them are from Gen Z. You have to also understand that Iran's population has doubled since 1979 till now. So it's a very young population. And so what they've done is they've been able to organize. They've been able to, in these networks, they're able to actually learn and study a bit more too about what is actually the history of Iran, because unfortunately, Iran has been under dictatorship from one dictatorship to another. People really don't even know our own history, and what is the history of the struggle for freedom in Iran. 120 years that people have been fighting for freedom in Iran.
And they don't know anything except for this, right? Like, we remember a time before something like Trump where it seemed a little bit more of a normal thing, but young people now, it's like, especially if they went through COVID in high school, they've had a really unique experience coming into adulthood. They've never really like had a normal experience with politics in the world, and we worry about that here. And it sounds like that knowing that there's a change, there is something kind of magical, that even though they haven't lived through it, they know the change is possible. That's really cool.
Yeah.
In 2024, for instance, there were over 39,000 activities carried out by the resistance units in 1 year, and over 3,000 centers of suppression were targeted by them. So that, just imagine like the effect that it has. That is why you're seeing a different type of bravery now in the streets. You see how organized they have become underground. Like, for instance, the regime attacks, everyone automatically like is taking back. Like 5-6 of them, they stand and they're like, no, continue chanting, continue, stand, use rocks, do this. And they're able to bring back the people on the streets. And this is something that's truly phenomenal. And we also saw these rebellious youth that they're learning from that on the scene, and they're organizing. I mean, before all of this, 2 towns were liberated by the people. They disarmed the suppressive forces, and this is something that has been done. The regime gave a report yesterday in one of their televisions that over, I think, 60,000 weapons have been confiscated from the suppressive forces. So this is the type of thing that people have been doing on the ground, and that is, really, that's what the regime fears, because they know that these people have made a decision.
Now they can shoot back. That's scary.
They need to fight back. But the only thing is that the international community needs to recognize their right to resist, because otherwise the regime will use this as a as something that they bring to the table, that, we're the victims here because we're being targeted by, these hooligans and terrorists and whatnot. So that's what we had to deal with terrorism. Don't you guys deal with terrorism? We're dealing with terrorism too. And that is the narrative that the regime is feeding right now to the international community. So this is really important, to recognize the people's right to resist. Because the reality is they're defending themselves.
It's so hard not to draw small parallels between what we're talking about at a really devastating level that's happening in Iran, and then some of the small startings of those things in America. You're talking about people not being afraid and resisting and starting to wake up to how big and important it is here. And I'm curious, because you're an Iranian-American based in Europe. You grew up in DC. You understand American culture and values. And then you've been fighting for democracy in Iran since you were a teenager. What do you think are some important lessons that we can learn here in America? And also, like, how do you square those two things, that you're like fighting really hard for Iran and then maybe witnessing some really weird stuff start in America here?
We realize that there are things, there are certain principles, certain values, certain rights that a lot of times we take for granted, so we don't safeguard them.
Yeah,
I think that's like one of the main things that I have always witnessed. If you value something, if something is really valuable to you, you take care of it, right? Like, for instance, I don't know, if you have a pet or a plant that you love, you're going to, you're going to nurture it, you're going to care for it, you're going to protect it, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with your rights. You need to understand, first of all, having that understanding that don't take it for granted. There are a lot of people around the world who wish they had that kind of freedom,
Do you think that Americans have gotten too comfortable? Like, do you think that it's just easy? They think, it's always going to be like this because that's what I know.
I think a lot of times we take it for granted, and just we think that this is, this is how it's always going to be, or this is, a given. It's not a given. So you have to understand that. And then once you have that understanding, you'll put in the checks and balances or whatever is needed to make sure that this is safeguarded in whatever circumstances. You need to be able to speak to one another. You need to be able to talk. You need to be able to try to understand the differences and just come to terms together instead of reaching a point that there's a point of no return.
It seems like the communication problems in Iran are technical and the communication problems in America are cultural, right? And so, but like without that communication amongst the populace, you know, it divides them. It makes them fragmented and less able to have a cohesive movement or a cohesive sort of push towards, in our case, say, election reform, which is overwhelmingly supported by people, or in the case of the Iranian people fighting back against the regime, it's more difficult without communication. It seems like Elon Musk should turn Starlink on.
Well, Zolal, one of the things that you also do, if I'm correct, is work towards fighting disinformation, which is something we deal with here a lot now. And with the advent of AI, it's starting to get really scary. Is Iran experiencing that kind of stuff as well?
Oh, definitely. We have like a whole branch that's working on this, is validating the videos and footage that are coming in.
Yeah.
And like, for instance, one of the things that we are seeing is people on the streets are saying their slogans are down with dictator.
I'm willing to hear it in Farsi right now, Zolal, if you want. I that's music to my ears.
They say امسال سال خونه سید علی سرنگونه, means this year is the year of blood and Khamenei has to go.
I love it.
They also like down with Khamenei, but also down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the mullahs. People, or like for instance, there's one that's it's more the university students that are giving it, but they say no to the crown, no to the turban, freedom and liberty, equality. That's what we want.
So to be clear, the Iranian people do not want the return of the Shah.
No.
No.
I mean,
No.
Just to be crystal clear.
No.
Yeah, just, I mean, put yourself in the place of an Iranian and just like logically thinking about it. So you are giving this huge price to be able to throw away this dictatorship. Are you going to go and recycle the previous dictatorship?
Yeah,
I mean,
no, totally. I think it sounds foolish to ask the question, but it's important I think, for Americans to hear, because there's a lot of misinformation.
Yeah, in Venezuela, everyone's like, "Oh, we got rid of the bad guy." Nope, his whole regime is still in place. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Like, so I mean, the reality is that the people of Iran had a revolution for a reason. Unfortunately, because there was a dictatorship in place before, people knew what they didn't want, but they didn't know what their choices were, because those who had created the revolution were in prisons till the last day. Actually, Tuesday is January 20th will be the anniversary of the release of the last set of political prisoners during the revolution in 1979. So we have, I mean, maybe people like from my generation, we weren't born then, we hadn't seen it, but we've heard about it. We know what happened back then.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a saying in Farsi, they say, whenever they want to say, like, don't talk about something, they'll say, watch out, the walls have mice and the mice have ear. This is what people used to say in regards to Savak, because the Savak was everywhere, and it was, you know, everyone lived under this fear that even in our own houses, we can't talk.
And that is the secret police of the Shah, the Savak?
Yeah, and the brutalities of the Savak, it's very sad, but the reality is that right now, like for instance, if you look at the reports from Amnesty International in like 1976, they say Iran is the #1 state in execution and persecution of its people. And then you look at 2025, it's still the same. Iran is the #1 country in executions and torture and persecuting its own people. So the people of Iran, yes, the regime that came in power was far more worse because it's a theocratic regime. Right. So it's a religious dictatorship. It's ideological dictatorship. So it's
when God is on your side, I mean, you can do anything you want.
Yeah, and then during the Shah's time, it was a classical dictatorship that was supported by the West. But also, he also tried to use that religious stuff too.
I was watching documentaries about Iran, modern Iranian history, because there's thousands of years of Iranian history. So you kind of have to pick your pick your decades.
Mm-hmm.
But that after the downfall of the Shah, the rise of the theocratic regime, there was a point where there was a constitution kind of drawn up that actually gives the Iranian people the scaffolding they need technically to actually build a democratic society. So there is actually there's like bureaucratic hope, for lack of a better phrase, that this revolution will actually kind of bear fruit.
Unfortunately, Khomeini didn't allow people to. I mean, it was one thing on paper, but in reality, they didn't allow people to get involved in the process of creating the constitution, and that's why we see where it led. They created the Velayat Faqih, and then they said there's a guardian council who are all mullahs, and they're the ones who actually put together the constitution. That's where it derailed the whole revolution and everything. So that
the revolution started off democratic, but it was kind of co-opted by the religious right.
Stolen.
And
unfortunately, it was hijacked by Khomeini. He finally came up with some kind of a plan a few months ago. But when you read it, it's a blueprint for another dictatorship, worse than his father's, because, like, for instance, it says we need to revive the Sabak. We need to recreate the Eternal Guards, which is the equivalent to the IRGC today. And he says because he doesn't have any organizational structure, he's like, I depend on the military for that. So
he just wants to rebrand. He doesn't want to reform.
Yeah, rebranding. Exactly. I'm curious because Doug's kind of asking about stuff like we're talking about maybe like in the last 100 years. And I'm wondering if before we go, because you've been so generous with your time, if you can speak to something that's kind of an American cultural meme that's been going around the last couple years that has to do with equal rights for women in Iran. And we have this meme and kind of idea that goes around that there was this time in Iran where women were almost equal and they were wearing very Western American clothing. You know, in the photos we see, they're like, this was Iran in the 1960s? 70s, yeah. Sorry. And then this is how far they've kind of backslid now. And then they'll talk about sort of that. Can you just speak to, first of all, how accurate you feel that is? You have been really vocal about equal rights for women. Do you think that perception is accurate? And what do you think equal rights for women looks like in Iran?
Unfortunately, that's not accurate. Unfortunately, even the Iranians say this. They're like, just imagine in 40 years, there are going to be some people who are going to share pictures of Upper Tehran today, and they're like, look how modern and cool people were during the Khamenei's time. The reality is that, unfortunately, the Shah was also a misogynist, government. I don't know if you've seen his interview with Barbara Walter. He talks about, women as not even being equal to a man, and she finally asks him, like, okay, like, if something happens to you today, who's going to rule the country, your 9-year-old son or your wife? And he's like, of course, my son.
But the leader of your democratic revolution is a woman, right?
Exactly. That's what I want to get to right now.
Yeah.
Iranians have experienced this, especially when it comes to women, that every dictatorship they try to be able to keep control, they need to be able to control one part of society to be able to have control over everything. Women have been that tool for the regime currently, but also previously too, during Reza Shah's time. Back then, Reza Shah, he wanted to present himself as modern because the British had brought him in. He wanted to just give them that green light that, look, I'm doing what you want. So what he did was he forced women to remove their veils and scarves. Back then, like, this is 100 years ago. I mean, that was very difficult, and that's like, it was a issue, but that pushed half of society back into their homes, but they're like, I'm not going to go out like this. I'm not going to leave the house like this. That's what it did. And then Khomeini came in, used that same tool, but in a different direction. He said, women have to wear a scarf or have a compulsory veiling. And actually, the members of the MK who were Muslim women themselves, they were the first to stand in front of this. And there's a historic the pictures are there and videos, but there's a historic demonstration of women coming to the streets, like 8th of March 1979. Then they're like, we didn't revolt for this, we revolted for freedom. And you see a chain of women who have a scarf right around them, trying to protect them to make sure that they're not attacked.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, what women want is choice. Is that right? They want the choice?
First of all, it's women are individual people. They don't belong to anyone. No one can give themselves that permission to tell them what to do or what not to do, or how to dress or how not to dress. That is not, you can't step into that area. You have no right or no jurisdiction in this area.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the Iranian resistance realized that, women have been suppressed systematically under these dictatorships. And so they saw the potential that women have in, countering that. And so since 1985, the Iranian resistance has had women in leadership positions, in the highest leadership positions, actually, as co-leader of the movement. But also since 1993, this organization has been led by a leadership council that is fully created by strong women who have resilience, and that they have been able to lead this fight, and they have shown how capable they are in every aspect.
Do you feel that access to education is a big part of that for women?
Education has always been like a cornerstone that's really important for people in Iran, especially in the last 40 years. I think women in Iran have looked at higher education as a way of resisting the mullahs.
Hell yeah, that's my kind of resistance, ladies. Get it.
So, for instance, right now you see like 60% of college students in Iran are women. It's not because there's like positive discrimination for women. No, it's because they see it as a way of resisting and fighting back this regime.
I love that.
Backward mindset. And also, as I said, Mrs. Rajavi was the one who created like the blueprints of this women empowerment. We say women are the force for change in Iran, and she has said this. I think one of her very moving speeches was in London in 1996. I remember I was a teenager at that time. I was 15, and I remember hearing her, and I was like, I can do whatever I put out my mind to.
She gotcha. Ooh, that just gave me chills. That's so inspiring.
And this is the president-elect of the resistance,
National
right?
Council of Resistance of Iran, yes.
Yeah.
What she did was, when she was placed in the leadership positions of this resistance, she didn't stop there. So she, one by one, she, extended her hand to everyone. She took them, under her own wings, and she started teaching them the ropes, teaching them how to stay strong, not to give in. Because the first thing is, unfortunately, because of society, we've been always told like there are things that women can't do. They're weaker, they're this, they're that. But she was like, no, you can do anything. The only thing is that, first of all, have respect for the choices that you make and pay the price for the choices that you make. And that's it.
I'm a big fan of strong female mentors showing others the way. That sounds so cool to me.
We see women who are leading the movement against the mullahs. So that is, I think, really key. I remember there was a article back this is back in the 1990s when I was still in high school, and I think in the New York Times at that time it said, "Watch out, mullahs, women armed and dangerous," and it was talking about the women of the Iranian resistance that are leading this fight, and it's come with a high price. 40,000 women have been executed by this regime. We also see that in the prisons they face the harshest tortures, the harshest situations, but they persevered and they prevailed, and that is what the regime fears the most. Mrs. Rajavi, in that speech in London that I was telling you, she said to the mullahs, the suppressed women today are the vanguards of tomorrow, and they are the ones who are going to end your reign. And we're seeing that now on the streets inside of Iran, and how it's resonating with the younger generation.
Amazing. Okay, so you gave a little bit of a, succinct list for what you wanted international allies or people to do in terms of supporting Iran. But for listeners on an individual level, what would your call to action be for any of our listeners?
There's a few things that all of us can do. First of all, echo the voice of the Iranian people and their demands, contact your lawmakers, ask your members of Congress, or if you're in other countries, your members of parliament, and your lawmakers, tell them to stand by the Iranian people and reiterate what it is that the Iranian people want. The Iranian people want to move forward to a secular democratic republic. They say there's a third option. This is the messaging. They say when it comes to Iran, there's a third option. So the solution is neither war or troops on the ground or anything like that, neither appeasement. The solution is supporting the Iranian people and their resistance for them to take their destiny into their own hands and to be able to create change. We're not stuck in choosing between two types of dictatorship. There's a way forward, and that's creating a democratic secular republic and having people's sovereignty. Yes. And I think that is a very important message to give, because a lot of people, as you said, they are fed this rosy image of, the time of the Shah. They're like, oh, so what was wrong with that? Let's go back to that. I mean, it was a dictatorship. The people revolted for a reason. It wasn't, they were naive. And so we want to put that past behind us and to be able to move forward. There is a clear roadmap, and that's the 10-point plan presented by Mrs. Rajavi. If you search Mariam Rajavi 10-point plan, you'll be able to read it. But it is something that we can all unite on. And the third is that this regime has to go in its entirety. You can't keep parts of it, because it's like, it's a cancer, right? And it's taking over this body. If you leave one part of it, it's going to grow. You need to remove it completely to be clear. And I think that is what the Iranian people are calling for. Take to social media, share this message, and also take part in protests, rallies, gatherings in support of the Iranian people. If you would like to find out, places that they're holding them in the U.S., you could reach out to OIAC. It's OIAC. It's the Organization of Iranian-American Communities. And for those who are in Europe or in Australia or wherever else, they could reach out to iranfreedom.org, and they would be able to put them in contact with local activists. On 7th of February, there's actually going to be a huge rally actually in Berlin. They're expecting tens of thousands of people to be in attendance. So that is coming up too for those who are in Europe.
Wonderful. Well, Zolal, thank you so much for giving us your time. This is such an important and historic sort of moment, and we're really, really thankful to have you echoing, like you said, sort of amplifying and echoing what's happening there. And
hopefully in a year we can have you on again to tell us how the reforms are going.
Yep.
Hopefully in a year we could invite you to a free Iran and you guys can host this podcast there and speak to people.
That would be awesome. I would love to visit Iran. I love Iranian food. Oh my God. Persian food. I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm there.
Yeah.
Give it to me. Meat on a stick, baby.
Yeah. Thank you, Zolal, so much. And thank you for doing your important work. We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, Zolal.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being with you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of People Fuss. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and of course, fuss around in the comment section on YouTube.
Yes, please. If you want to support conversations that create connection and promote progressive, human-centered stories, visit patreon.com/peoplefuss and become one of our monthly subscribers. Or you could even just send us a one-time donation.
Or you could just send us 10-time donations.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as our cats enjoyed annoying us from behind the closed doors.
They are such whiners. All right, everyone. Until the next one.
Bye.
Bye.